Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, I should say. Welcome to this training session brought to you by the Society of American Archivists, Archivists of Religious Collections section. My name is Vinny Barraza, Head of Archives and Special Collections at Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans. And we acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional lands of many indigenous nations. We know that indigenous peoples have suffered from historical and ongoing injustices, and understand as an archival organization that we must work towards sharing historical truths and renew respectful relationships with indigenous communities. We respect the longstanding relationships that indigenous nations have to this land as the original caretakers. We are grateful for their stewardship and protection of the water and earth. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Today's topic is archival description in Canada. Before I introduce our presenters, let's review the disclaimer. The content in these presentations is for information only and is not legal advice. Our views do not represent the organizations where we work. We do not make any endorsements or guarantees. We are not liable for any loss or damage caused by your use of the content we provide. It is your responsibility to critically evaluate the content provided in the presentation or any accompanying materials. Please mute your microphone and turn off your video. Also, please remember the points shown on this slide. You can click on the closed captioning button to get closed captioning under the More button seen at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There will be a question period after the presentation concludes. Please use the Q&A feature under the More button to ask your questions during the question and answer period. We will not be monitoring the chat, so please avoid putting any questions in there. Please be respectful in your interactions, and we expect you to follow the SAA Code of Conduct located at the displayed address. This session will be recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube channel within 2 weeks. We also encourage you to join the Society of American Archivists if you are not a member. And now I would like to introduce our presenters. Jana Toms is an archivist at the Public Archives and Records Office of Prince Edward Island, Canada. She received her Master of Information Studies degree from McGill University. In her role as Systems Archivist, Jana is responsible for digital initiatives at the PEI Public Archives, as well as a range of other archival duties. She has extensive experience in writing archival descriptions according to rules for archival description, RAD, and in using archival databases such as Access to Memory, ADAM. Jana is a member of the joint US-Canada ADAM Users Group and the Archives Canada Working Group. Our second presenter, and who will be starting shortly, Mary Grace Costa, is a retired archivist. Presently, she co-chairs the joint US-Canada ADAM Users Group and the Canadian Council of Archives, Archives Canada Working Group. She chairs the SAA-ARCS of Religious Collections Section Models and Resources Subcommittee. She is a member of the SAA Graduate Education Committee and the SAA Section Health Assessment Working Group. She is also a member of the NDSA Communications and Publications Working Group, the ADAM Foundation Communications Committee, and the Association of Canadian Archivists Professional Development Committee. And now we hand it over to Mary Grace Costa.
Thanks, Vinny. I'll just wait for Jana to get the slides up.
You see it there, Mary Grace?
I see it. We're good to go. Okay.
Perfect.
Today we'll introduce archival description using the Canadian Content Standard, Rules for Archival Description, or RAD. There are other data content standards, including DACS, ISAD-G, and RDA. There are also data structure standards, such as MARC and EAD, which we will not touch on. The topics we'll cover are arrangement, guiding principles for description, starting out with the RAD manual, minimal required elements for description, authority records, access points, crosswalks to RAD from DACS, and archival management systems. We'll only talk about the required elements for a minimal description, not about optional elements in RAD or DACS. Next. Processing has three components: preservation, arrangement, and description. People may approach archival processing in different ways. I'm going to tell you about my method. The examples shown are from a project I did processing 10 boxes and binders. It took 36 hours to unpack supplies, make boxes, do preservation work, name files, make box lists, arrange materials into series, and create an archival description of the records. When you get one or more boxes of records donated or transferred to your archives, it's important to accession these records so you have information about the record's creator and the chain of custody. Remember that the most damage to records is due to improper handling. As you work on preserving the materials, you get a good idea of what is contained, including date ranges. The principle of respect des fonds is that we keep the records of a creator together, and we keep records in their original order to reflect how they were originally kept and used. Next. Have all your supplies ready. Acid and lignin-free legal size folders, paper, boxes, and photo enclosures, bone folder, spatula, Olfa knife, cork-backed ruler, brush, scissors, some 2HB pencils, Staedtler eraser, and cotton gloves. Refolder the material in legal size folders, scoring the bottom of each folder if needed to provide a wider ledge to support the materials. Remove anything that will damage the materials, such as binders, metal fasteners, rubber bands, plastic, and sticky notes. Rehouse photographs, put newsprint into slings, and unfold folded items. Make sure to write accurate file names that reflect the contents on each folder, as well as dates. The dates should be the dates the records were created, not the dates referred to in the records. For example, if you have invoices dated in 1923 and 1924, the file title could be Invoices, and the dates would be 1923 to 1924, even if the January 1923 invoice was for purchases made in December 1922. Remember to keep the original order as you work, but if materials within a folder are out of order, you can impose an order, usually chronological, for correspondence or minutes. You can also weed out duplicates. It helps to make notes as you go about types of records you find and whether you kept the original order or had to impose an order on the records. Next. Here's a handy tip. For each file containing photographs, put a sheet at the front of the folder that gives the total number and type of photographs. This will help later when you describe the records. As mentioned, if you come across a folder where the material is out of order, for example, meeting minutes, you can reorder these chronologically. You can also discard anything that is non-archival or a duplicate. Remember that a folder is not a file. A file is an intellectual unit. If a folder is not large enough to contain all the contents of a file, for example, all the meeting minutes for 1940, break the material into more than one folder and label these 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3, and so forth with the same file name on each folder. Put each folder you have completed into a new box in the order in which it was found originally in the old box. Use a spacer if needed to keep the folders from sagging. Make sure to number the box. When you finish a box, make a box list for that box with the names of all the folders in the order in which they were found in the box originally. Next. Let's just take a moment to talk about the organization of archival records. As you arrange records, you follow the hierarchical structure of record groups, font or collection, sous-font, series, subseries, files, and items. A font is the overall grouping of records created by a person, a family, or a corporate body. This is known as a collection in the United States, but in Canada, a collection refers to an artificial accumulation of materials. A sous-font is a creator within a creator. For example, the records of Bill Smith within the grouping of the Smith family font. A series reflects an activity carried out by the creator. For example, Bill Smith's photographs. A subseries is a grouping within a series. For example, Bill's professional photographs. A file contains a group of items. For example, the file titled Jobs 1950 contains the individual photographs taken by Bill in his professional career during that particular year. Returning to your processing work, don't physically rearrange folders until you have the box list done. Then look at the box list. This may reflect the original order, or it may reflect some of the original order if the folders in the original box were out of order. On this slide, you see a partial box list, which still reflects the original order in which the records were received by the archives. Next. At this point, you have completed the preservation work, refoldering, rehousing, and reboxing. All folders have correct titles and dates. There is a box list for each box. Next. After you have completed the processing of your boxes, arrange files into series by grouping together on paper all the files that are the result of the same activity. For example, meeting minutes, correspondence, finance, administration, fundraising, etc. This will result in changes to your original box lists to reflect the revised order. The series title should be the name of the activity that produced the records, for example, correspondence. The font title will be the name of the creator of the records. Remember not to include dates in the font or series titles, only in the file titles. Once you're done, you will likely need to physically rearrange some files between boxes. For example, if you have meeting minutes in box 1 and meeting minutes in box 2, you can bring these together in the first box as a series, meeting minutes. When you have your box lists redone, number the font, series, and files. Type up the new list, which will be your series and file list. Double check that the order in each box matches that on the series and file list. On this slide, you see a partial series and file list. Next, label each box with the box number, the font number, and the font title. You have completed the preservation and arrangement steps of processing. Remember, the more time you spend on arrangement, the easier description will be. It is very important to have a minimal archival description for each record group in your archives. This makes your record groups accessible to researchers. It is also very important to do the arrangement and description work prior to digitization in order to get accurate metadata for the digitized items. Next. At this point, you have identified all the series and completed the intellectual arrangement. You have rearranged folders within the boxes into the appropriate series to match the arrangement on the list of series and files, added nice box labels, and you're ready to write the archival description for the full level. To follow a more product, less process approach, you could reduce the amount of preservation work, for example, not removing staples, and create only a minimal description at the highest level, the fond. Jana?
So now that we've reviewed the physical arrangement and housing and processing of the archival material, we'll talk about archival description and how and why we create finding aids. So the goal of the archival description is to provide context to the archival material, to describe the content and facilitate access. To do that, we use data content standards like RAD and DACS or others. These are sets of rules for describing our archival material. It allows our institutions and our users to talk about holdings using the same language. And using these standards, we create finding aids, which identify and describe the archival records and provide access to the information they contain. So some guiding principles for description. Archival description provides information about the creator of the records. And that may result in authority records or in a RAD description that might form part of your archival description. And also details about the records themselves. So the dates the records were created, the volume of material you're talking about, physical characteristics of the material, and contents of the records. Description goes from the general to the specific. So first you provide an overview of the entire font or collection, and then break it down into more discrete units if necessary or appropriate. In multi-level description, you have to indicate the relationship between the different levels of description. And also you're only talking about providing information that relates to the level of description being described. The rules apply to all media types. So whether you're talking about textual records, photos, sound recordings, it applies to all of that. And it can also be applied to multiple levels of description. Mary Grace?
RAD stands for Rules for Archival Description, and it's the Canadian content standard. It tells you what to put into an archival description. The RAD manual is organized into sections depending on record type. To illustrate this, Section 3 is about textual records, and Section 8 is about sound recordings. Each section gives the elements you need to use for an archival description with an explanation of the element and examples. Each section follows the numbering plan in Section 1. For example, in Section 1, 1.1b discusses the title proper element, and in Section 3, 3.1b discusses the title proper element for textual records, while in Section 8, 8.1b discusses the title proper element for sound recordings. Be sure to constantly refer to RAD for instructions on how to use each element, as well as punctuation and spacing. If you don't open RAD, you're not doing it right. Multi-level description is optional. This is when you describe the highest level, the fond, and then lower levels, such as the series. We will discuss minimal level or level 1 description only, just the fond level. On this slide, you see a partial archival description. Next. When starting your description work, first get a bird's eye overview of the records. Don't get bogged down in detail on every item. You don't have time. Use the records themselves as well as the accession record and any reference materials that are helpful in preparing the description. You'll be describing the records at the highest level, which is usually the fond, or maybe the next lower level, the sous-fond or series. Information you give at a higher level, for example, a subject access point, is not repeated at a lower level. It percolates down from the higher level to all levels below it. For example, from the fond level to all its series, or from a series to all its subseries. A special note on collections. Make it clear in the title that the record group was either collected by a person or is a collection about something. For example, Isadora Duncan collection is a collection that Isadora made, while collection about Isadora Duncan is a collection about Isadora. Make sure to note the date ranges for the entire fond and for each sous-fond, series, and subseries level. Remember, these are not the dates referred to in the records. These are the dates of when the records themselves were created. The dates for all the lower levels that you describe must fall within the date range for the fond. RAD gives rules for how to specify dates, including tricky ones. Next. The most important elements are extent, scope and content, and administrative history or biographical sketch. I like to think of elements as fields to be filled in. The physical description area is where information about the quantity and format of records is given. The extent element is required. Measure across the top of the files in the box to get a measurement in centimeters. Include totals for photographs. This is where the sheets listing quantity and types of photographs that you made while doing arrangement will be useful. Also, include the size of digital files. For example, 2 gigabytes of textual records, as well as the number of scrapbooks and so forth. The scope and content element gives information about the kind of records and interesting facts about the records. This element is very important. It tells the researcher whether the archives holds records that are of any use to them and whether they want to make a visit. The administrative history is given at the highest level, usually at the fond level. However, the extent and scope and content elements are used at all levels. On this slide, you see a partial scope and content note and a partial administrative history. Jana?
So the RAD manual is a large and somewhat cumbersome document. It can be intimidating when you're just getting started, but really it can be boiled down to a handful of standard elements or fields that can be applied to just about every archival description. So we're now going to talk about those minimal required elements or fields for a RAD description. They're on the screen here: title, dates, extent, administrative history, biographical sketch, custodial history, scope and content, and then a series of notes. There are lots more fields that can accommodate all other kinds of details regarding the archival description, but the vast majority of descriptions that I do, a lot of the information can be caught just in these fields here. Your own institution may have certain fields that it requires. I know my institution has some required fields that are not technically RAD required, but they are required for us. Today, we're just going to focus on these fields that we have on the screen, and we're only going to focus on a top-level description. We're also going to look at a few of these required fields that, while they're required, they're not always necessary in every case. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So the first required field is title, which is RAD 1.1. There are two types of titles. There are formal titles and supplied titles. At the full and even series level, it's almost always going to be a supplied title. So that's a title that you as the archivist are creating based on the material that you're describing. So there are two parts to a supplied title. There's a name element and then a word or a phrase to describe the nature of the archival unit. So for instance, for a person, it might be the Gertrude Macmillan Collection. A family could be the Warburton Longworth Family Collection. And an organization such as the Charlottetown Gaslight Company. And this, like I said, these supplied titles are almost always going to be applied at the full and even series level. Dates. So dates in your RAD description refer to the oldest and the most recent date of the material in the unit that you're describing. So dates can be presented in lots of different ways. RAD provides all kinds of guidelines to deal with dates. As Mary Grace mentioned, there's lots of tricky dates out there, and RAD can guide you on those. But the vast majority of dates are relatively straightforward. So you'll have an exact date. You might have a date range, such as on the screen, 1905 to 1980, or a set of date ranges, 1900 to 1925 and 1945 to 48, meaning there's a gap there where there are no records between 1926 and 1944. Or you can have a date range with a few outlier dates, such as 1855 to 1858, 1870, and 1896. So these are the more common types of dates you'll be representing, but if you have other more complicated dates or questions about dates, RAD will give you all kinds of guidelines on that. Extent. Extent refers to how many units are being described and of what type. So extent is part of the physical description area of a RAD description. When you're talking about textual material, you measure extent in meters. If you're talking about other types of media, such as number of photos or sound recordings, you give exact or estimated numbers. And there are standard ways to present this information. So if you're looking at just one media type, you indicate that and indicate the type of media. So the first example is 0.3 meters of textual records. Pretty straightforward. If you're dealing with multiple media types, you either use a particular form of punctuation, which is a series of spaces, periods, and dashes, or you can use different lines to separate the different media types. Your institution may have a particular way that you have to do it. I know mine does. Or the database, if you're using an archival management system, it might format the extent information a particular way. But RAD provides all this information, so you can refer to it or your own institutional guidelines as needed. If you're dealing with more than 3 record types or media types in a full, there is again another way to present that information. So you provide information about the largest type of material, and then use the phrase "and other material." And then you detail that other material in a physical description note. So the final example there on the screen is 3.24 meters of textual records and other material. And then it gives a physical description note giving the details about the photos and negatives and other material that's there. We'll talk more about physical description notes a little bit later. So that brings us to administrative history and biographical sketch. So administrative history gives information about the organization that created the records. So it's the structure and history of that organization. It's things like dates, the role or mandate or purpose of the organization, any name changes, any predecessor or successor bodies, the administrative structure of the organization, and maybe how that organization related to bodies above and below it. You might include names of founding members, chief officers, leaders in the organization, and really any other information that seems relevant that would be important for the researcher to have to understand who this organization was that created the records. So I have an example here for the Charlottetown Gaslight Company. It tells us when it was incorporated, what they did, how long they operated, and when they were finally bought out by another organization. So just a bit of contextual information about the creator to provide a little context to the records that you're going to be describing. Biographical sketch is the same idea, except it relates to a person or family that created the records. So include things like names, married names, nicknames, dates and places of birth, names of spouses, names of children, place of residence, educational background, occupation or career, offices held, social life and activities. Was the person or family really involved in the local community? What sorts of organizations did they belong to? Any significant awards or accomplishments or honors they had. And again, any other information that seems relevant to the person or the family you're describing. So the example here is for Fanny Amelia Bayfield. It tells us when she was born in England, when she came to Canada, when she came to Prince Edward Island, and the fact that she was an accomplished painter and taught painting for a number of years here in Prince Edward Island before she died in 1891. Custodial history. So custodial history gives information about the custody of the records after they left the custody of the creator. So this information can be really helpful in helping the researcher determine the authenticity and reliability of the archival records. But it can also be tricky because in a lot of cases, you may not have this information when you're doing your archival description. So this is a required field in RAD, but if you don't have any information to include, you can omit it. So in my organization, we rarely have custodial history information that we can share with researchers. We just don't know much about what happened to the records after they left the creator. So we often don't include this field. But if you do have that information, an example of a custodial history element might be the records were found in the attic of a house during renovations, and then were donated to the archives by the then owner of the house. But again, custodial history is one of those required, but not always required elements that we have in RAD. Scope and content. So Mary Grace mentioned that your scope and content is a super important element, and it is because it tells your researcher about what the records are and what they can expect to find there. So it gives things like date ranges, types of records. Are you dealing with minutes, ledgers, diaries? And gives information about why the records were created and how they were used. So your scope and content is a super important element in your description, and it almost always starts the same way. It has to indicate the level of description that you're at. So it almost always starts with a phrase like, this font contains, this collection consists of, and then goes on to describe the contents of the font or collection. So the example on the screen is a daybook. It gives the span of years, the information included in the daybook, and lets you know that in addition to the daybook, there's a couple of certificates included in the font as well. So that brings us to the required notes. But remember, not all of them will be necessary for every description. So the first note is a source of supplied title note. This is almost always needed because, as we talked about earlier, your title is almost always a supplied title. So this note lets the user know that it's a supplied title and tells them what you used to come up with that title. So again, these are fairly boilerplate, but title based on the provenance of the font, title based on the contents of the collection. These are usually pretty simple notes that you can repeat in different font or collection you're describing pretty easily. Physical description note. So the physical description note is used to provide extra details about the extent and physical characteristics of the records. So this information, if you use that and other material notation in the extent element earlier, this is where you're going to give those further details. So 3.24 meters of textual records and other material appeared in the extent. The physical description note will indicate the number of photos, negatives, contact sheets, prints, and slides. If you're able to capture all that information, all that extent information in the extent element, you don't have to include a physical description note. So while required, you don't always need to use this particular one. Arrangement note. Any notes regarding the arrangement of the material that would be useful for the researcher to have can be indicated here. So if the arrangement has been imposed by the archivist, that could be noted. If there has been an attempt to recreate the original order, you know that you have a pretty good idea of what the original order was, but it got messed up before it came to your organization. You try to recreate it based on the file naming or the numbering, for instance. You can note that in the arrangement note. If you don't have anything to add here, or if you're able to kind of capture that arrangement information in the scope and content, then that's okay. You don't have to include an arrangement note if there's really nothing to say, or if it's already stated in an earlier element. Restrictions notes. So this is where you would indicate any restrictions on access, reproduction, or publication of material. My organization, we have standard restriction notes that we put on every description. So our standard restriction note is there is no restriction, and that we have a statement that's on the screen here that in order to reproduce material from our collection, you need our permission, and copyright is always the problem for the user to deal with. So we have that on every description. If there are restrictions, we will indicate that here. So we'll change our standard wording and put in the appropriate restrictions, such as materials restricted until 2028. Again, this is an institutional decision to make that a required field. It is required by RAD, but if your organization isn't, if you don't have any restrictions on the material, you may choose to omit it, and that would be okay. Accrual notes. This can be noted if either you do expect to get more material for this font or collection. You could say further accruals are expected. If you know for sure you're never going to get anything else related to this font or collection, that could be stated. Or if you're not sure, you can also omit it. This is another field where at my organization, we hardly ever use the accruals notes because transfers from within our organization are very irregular. So it's not really useful to say when things are coming because we really never know. And with private donations, we never usually know if there's going to be more material coming at a later date. So we often don't use the accruals note, but it is there if you need it. So having reviewed all of the minimal required elements for a RAD description, here's an example of one from my organization. Again, it's the Charlottetown Gas Light Company. You can see the title, the dates, the extent, the administrative history, scope and content, source of supplied title, and our standard restrictions. I know it's hard to read on the screen, but this kind of gives you an overview of those fields. And you'll see that there is no custodial history mentioned. Physical description, arrangement, and accrual notes were not included because they weren't required in this case. So you can see there's lots of different elements, but when you put them all together, a really basic RAD description can be as simple as this. Kind of a one-pager or half a pager to get some really important information out there for your researchers so they know whether or not this is something that's relevant to them. All right, Mary Grace.
Besides describing the records, you also describe the creator or collector of the records in an authority record. The authority record is connected to the archival description, either by being included in it or by maintaining a separate authority record which is linked to it. It is easier to maintain one authority record rather than entering authority information separately in archival descriptions. Next. The minimal elements used for an authority record are shown here. We'll look at each in turn. For some elements, there is no corresponding required element in RAD, but the element is still required by the International Standard Archival Authority Record for Corporate Bodies, Persons, and Families, or ISAR-CPF. These elements are also required in an archival management system, such as access to memory, also known as ADAM or A to M. In the ISAR-CPF standard, there are 4 required elements for an authority record: type of entity, authorized form of name, dates of existence, and authority record identifier. Next. First, the administrative history or biographical sketch element, which Jana covered quite thoroughly. This is discussed in the archival description area in RAD. In some archival management systems, such as ADAM, information for this element is entered as part of the authority record and flows through to the archival description record. This is because in ADAM, you enter the archival description separately from the authority record. This element gives information about the history of the corporate body or a biography of the person or family who created the records. By using this element, you provide a description of activities important for understanding the context of the creation and use of the records. Don't give an administrative history or biographical sketch at lower levels unless the creator is different, for example, in a sous-fond. A very short example is shown on this slide. Next. Next, the type of entity element. This element is not discussed in RAD, but is required by ISAR-CPF and in an archival management system such as ADAM. This element gives information about whether the creator is a corporate body or a person or a family. Next. Next, the authorized form of name element. RAD discusses this under administrative history in the archival description area. This element gives information about the approved form of the name of the corporate body, person, or family. For a person, give a surname first, followed by the first name. For a family, give the surname followed by the word family. A good source for the authorized form of name is the Library of Congress Name Authority file or the Virtual International Authority file, both of which can be browsed online. Next. Next, the dates of existence element. For corporate bodies, this is found in RAD under Administrative History in the Archival Description area. For persons, this is found in RAD under Biographical Sketch in the Archival Description area. This element gives information about the dates that the corporate body was founded and its end date if it has ceased operation, or the birth and death dates for a person, or the lifespan for a family. If the person is still living, give only the birth date. For a family, give the earliest birth date of a family member and the death date of the last remaining family member if there are no living members. Next. Next, the authority record identifier element. This is not found in RAD, but is a required element under ISAR-CPF and in an archival management system like ADAM. This element gives information about the unique authority record identifier according to local and/or national conventions. Jana?
So this brings us to access points. Access points could be subjects, place names, names of people, organizations, types of material, or identifiers. What all these things have in common is that they use some sort of controlled vocabulary and standard format to facilitate access. Your organization may already have existing authorities, such as the Library of Congress subject headings or Library of Congress name authorities, or you may have to create authorities from scratch. In many cases, institutions do a bit of both in terms of using established authorities and also creating entries that meet the needs of your organization. So we're going to talk about name access points, geographical names, and subjects today. So name access points, RAD deals with personal name, family name, and corporate body names in RAD. There are lots of rules for personal names and family names. Some of it can get very overwhelming, but the majority of name access points are pretty straightforward, such as the examples that are here on the screen. There's lots of existing authorities out there, such as Library of Congress Name Authority File and Virtual International Authority File. Mary Grace mentioned both of those are available online. And they will, between those and creating names for your own organization, most of the names, as I said, are fairly straightforward, but RAD does provide lots of details if you're dealing with more complicated names, such as nobility and different honorifics that are included with certain types of names. Geographic names and place names. Again, there's lots of existing authorities out there. Library of Congress subject headings again, the Getty Thesaurus of Geographical Names online. So that can cover a lot of the bases. But you may find that you need something that's more regional, something that's more specific to where you are or what you're dealing with. So where I am in Prince Edward Island on the east coast of Canada, we needed something more specific. We needed something, we're a very small place, lots of tiny little communities represented in our collection. And they weren't represented in some of those larger authority record authorities that we were looking at. So we use something called the Geographical Names of Prince Edward Island by Alan Rayburn. It's an older resource, but it's still very relevant. And it covers a lot of ground for us. So we're able to draw on that resource and to get a more granular level of indexing and access points than we would with using some of those other larger international authorities that are out there. So there's no RAD element for subject headings. So there's no RAD element I can point to, but it has become commonplace to assign subject headings or topics to archival descriptions to further facilitate access. Again, Library of Congress subject headings is an excellent resource and will cover lots of what you need. But again, we here in Prince Edward Island felt like we needed something a little bit more regional, a little bit more local to deal with some of our unique cases. So we didn't develop our own subject authority. We took the Nova Scotia Subject Heading Authority with one of our neighboring provinces being the spearhead on that, and we have adapted it to reflect our own needs. So for instance, in Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, there was a conference held here in 1864. There were a bunch of meetings held that eventually led to the creation of Canada as a country. So it's a big deal for us. We've got lots of material related to the Charlottetown Conference. And we were having trouble finding a way to make that accessible to researchers because there's no subject heading in some of those other authorities for it. So we created our own heading for Charlottetown Conference, which allows us to provide access to lots of material in our collection that researchers want to find, but they wouldn't be able to find as easily without that specific subject heading. All right, Mary Grace.
There are similarities between the elements in describing archives a content standard or DACS and RAD. This is why it's possible to make crosswalks between them. Next. In DACS, a minimal description contains the elements shown on this slide, with the DACS element given first and the corresponding RAD element given second. The relevant sections in the DACS and RAD manuals are given in parentheses. There are 10 required elements for a DACS-compliant archival description. They are reference code, name and location of repository, title, date, extent, name of creator, scope and content, conditions governing access, languages and scripts of the material, and rights statement for archival description. There are 6 required elements for a RAD-compliant archival description. And these are starred on this slide. They are title proper, dates, extent, scope and content, custodial history, and notes. And of course, DACS is the standard, the content standard used in the United States. Next. In DACS, a minimal authority record contains the elements shown on this slide, with the DACS element given first and the corresponding RAD element given second. The relevant sections in the DACS and RAD manuals are given in parentheses. There are 5 required elements in a DACS-compliant authority record. They are authorized form of name, type of entity, dates of existence, authority record identifier, and rights statement for archival authority records. There are 5 required elements in a RAD-compliant authority record, and these are starred on this slide. It should be noted that RAD does not address authority records in the same way as DACS by giving required elements. However, this slide shows the required authority record elements according to ISAR CPF and when entering the authority information in an archival management system like ADAM. The administrative history or biographical sketch could be included in an archival description if the authority record is not linked to it. Otherwise, it should be included in the authority record. Jana?
So archival management systems, they're content management systems built for our archival collections. So there's lots of options out there. Some of us are using internal custom-built applications or databases. Some are using paid software with a one-time cost or a subscription cost. There's also open source options. Today, we're going to focus on access to memory, or ADAM, which we've mentioned a couple of times already. It's a web-based open source application. It's standard-driven, offers multilingual description, multi-repository environment. It is an open source product, but the company that runs ADAM is called Artifactual, and it does offer migration and hosting services to people who are interested in that. There is a fee involved for that, of course. We're going to walk you through some screenshots of ADAM today. We're not doing a live demo, too many variables. But at the end of the session, we will share a link to a YouTube channel where you can check out some how-to videos and get a bit more in-depth information if you're interested. So the example here on the screen is Memory PEI, which is my organization's ADAM instance. So if you log in, if you have an ADAM instance or database, when you log into it, when you go to create a new archival description, this is the screen you're going to see. Each of the headings in blue is a description area. And when you click on that blue highlighted area, it will open up a series of elements or fields for you to fill in. So as you go through the different elements and you put your cursor into each different element, a pop-up box will appear on the left. I've got one circled on the left side of the screen, and it tells you what information goes in that field, and it refers you to the part of RAD that is applicable. So this is really handy if, 1, you're new to RAD, or 2, you're new to ADAM, because it tells you exactly what to put in each field and where to look if you need more information. ADAM also has a series of required fields that it considers required for a basic RAD description. They're very similar to the RAD minimal fields we've already talked about. There's a few exceptions, but they're pretty similar. And they denote those required fields with a yellow asterisk. So title proper is circled there on your screen. You can see it has a yellow asterisk next to it. And that lets you know that's a required element. So again, really handy if you're new to Atom and you're not quite sure what you have to fill in, what's optional. The little asterisk lets you know what you should be filling in, or at least considering filling in for your basic description. One of the nice things about Atom is that even if you don't fill it in right away, you can go back and fill it in later. So if I didn't fill in that title proper on the first time through this screen, I wouldn't get an error message. I wouldn't crash the system. It would just save it without a title, and it would tell me you really should put a title on here. So it's very user-friendly that way. As you are filling in your archival description and all the different fields are coming up, there's also the option to add those access points we talked about. So you can choose access points from a drop-down list if you've already input your authority information. So you already have a subject authority in there, you already have place names in there. You can choose them from a drop-down list. If the term you need isn't there, there's another place in Atom where you can go and add that to your system. So this is an example of a subject heading. So you can see it tells me at the top that I'm dealing with subject taxonomy. The accepted term is corporations. It gives space for me to list the other terms that I would use corporations for. And then there's also a place for source notes. So that lets you track where you got this information from, which is really helpful when you're keeping up your authorities and making sure that everything's accurate, or if you need to make changes, you'll know how to track those changes. So this particular one, this is from our own instance. So the Nova Scotia Subject Heading Authority was what we used. It was created by our staff in 2000 and then entered into the Atom by me in 2014. So you could save this and then link it to the appropriate font or collections in the database. So it's a really easy way to bring together material related to that access point. So here is an example of an archival description in Atom. Again, it's the Charlottetown Gaslight Company. I know it's hard to see on the screen, and I've put the screen, I've cut it in two and put it side by side just to make the text a little bigger. Normally this would all display down your screen, you'd scroll down, but you can see the different description areas are there. There's data in there. You can see some of the fields that we've talked about, like title proper and dates and extent, as well as some of those required but not always required fields like restrictions on access. And then the access points are down below, they're highlighted in blue. And if I was to click on those access points, gaslighting, for instance, it would take me to other descriptions in our database with that subject term. So again, nice way for your researchers to kind of go off in different directions and maybe discover things that they wouldn't have discovered as easily otherwise had the access points not been there. So that was just a super, super quick overview of Atom. Some of you, I recognize your faces from other groups we're in. I know you're really familiar with Atom. Others, it might be new to you. If Atom is new to you and you'd like to learn more about it, you can visit the Access to Memory sandbox. The link is here on the screen at demo.accesstomemory.org, and you can get in there and actually play around with a sample of the database and see how the elements work together and how you can build that RAD description fairly easily. And we also have some how-to videos that have been created by the joint US-Canada Atom users group. That's a group that Mary Grace is a co-founder in and a leader in, and we've both contributed how-to videos to that YouTube channel. So you can check that out. We've got these links in the chat as well. So if you're interested in learning more about Atom and RAD and how it works together, you can check out some of those resources. Mary Grace.
Thanks, Jana. And these are 3 books that are helpful. 2 of them you can order from Society of American Archivists, Arranging and Describing Archives and Manuscripts by Kathleen D. Rowe, and also Archival Arrangement and Description, edited by Christopher Prom and Thomas Frusciano. And Module 1 in that book, Standards for Archival Description, is just excellent. And then the middle book, Organizing Archival Records by David W. Carmichael is a really, really useful book for learning how to do arrangement, and it has exercises too. Next. And here are some helpful links. There's Rules for Archival Description, which can be downloaded as a PDF. Also, Basic RAD, an introduction to the preparation of full and series level descriptions, which can also be downloaded as a PDF. Describing Archives, a content standard, or DACS, can be accessed. The most recent edition can always be accessed at the GitHub. Library of Congress Name Authority file and Virtual International Authority file are both searchable online. And all of these links, as Jana mentioned, are in the chat if you want to grab them from there. And that concludes our presentation. So over to you, Vinny.
Thank you so much, Mary Grace and Jana. That was fantastic. Reminder to everybody, if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom that can be found under More, and we would be happy to answer any questions you might have at this point. Yes, the session will be recorded and it is available and will be available on the SAA-ARCS YouTube channel within the next 2 weeks. I'm not sure about the slides. Mary Grace or Jana?
Yeah, no, the slides aren't ever available for our lunch and learns because we don't have a website that we can host the slides on. So it's just really impossible to share the slides. But as Vinny said, everything will be on the YouTube channel, and you can always stop the video and take a screenshot of whatever slide you're interested in.
No questions yet, but again, for all the participants, please feel free to drop any Q&A in there for us at this time.
I see there's something now, Vinny.
Yes, there is something that just came through. Question is how to manage an archival description database in which volunteers and students have worked haphazardly without training.
I don't know, maybe Janet, do you want to take that one? I don't know.
It's tough, you know, and I think we've all probably been there to a degree. You know, I know certainly at our organization, we've had lots of different people. Before we moved into Adam, we had a different internal database that we used. Lots of different people used it at different times. So there wasn't, we tried to be consistent, but there were little things that got through. So it's really tough. If you're able to do something for your volunteers or your students where I found these how-to videos that we did as part of the US Canada Joint User Group really helpful because we're a really small organization. We don't have the resources to create a lot of user guides and high-end training material for our staff. So now that we have those videos, that's where I'm pointing our intern to. That's where they're learning how, and I'm still happy to walk them through some stuff. But if you're able to access some online tools that are already out there, that might help. And kind of just have a list of resources that they can look at when they're getting started. But I mean, that is the challenge of dealing with, you know, lots of volunteers and lots of, you know, if you have a high turnover of volunteers and students and interns, it's tricky. Depending on your organization, I know here we have a gatekeeper too. So nothing goes public until it's reviewed. So not a perfect system. Still, you know, the gatekeeper can miss things too. But at least it's another set of eyes before a description goes live to the website. Or if there's a suspected problem with a description, it gets flagged and it gets reviewed by the staff before it goes up again. So having a person or a couple of people maybe share the duties if that's an option. Having at least one or two people that review everything, I know that's something we've done forever, and that really helps. It does catch some of those little glitches or inconsistencies before they become public.
And I just wanted to note too quickly that with Atom, if you're using access to memory or Atom or A to M, if you're using that archival management system, you can keep all your archival descriptions in draft form. And you don't have to publish them and make them public right away. So keep them in draft form and then have quality control, like Jana suggested, have somebody review them before they're published.
Mr. Douglas Roberts, are you opening up to using AI in your systems?
That isn't part of access to memory at present. And for doing archival description, uh, I mean, I think that would have to be an institutional choice. For me personally, I mean, you have to train the AI on something, right, for it to be accurate. So how do you train it on analog materials and in archives? I'm not even sure how that would work. But I don't know. Your thoughts, Jana?
Yeah, certainly not something we're doing right now. As Mary Grace mentioned, it's not part of Atom at this point. Who knows down the road if that'll be something they incorporate. Um, from our organizational point of view, a long, long time before we're going to be using any AI in our description work, I would say.
The next question, if you had the choice of using either platform described during the presentation, which one would you use for your archive?
Either platform? Do you mean either content standard, RAD or DACS? Is that what the question is? Is it? Okay, so I'll just say I'm going to assume you mean which content standard would we choose. So because we're in Canada, we use RAD because that is the Canadian content standard. Um, if you're in the United States, you'll more likely use DACS because that's the more widely accepted American standard. If you're overseas, you might even use ISAG. That's a more commonly used standard overseas. So it kind of depends where you're situated and what your institution wants to use. I will say that with Atom, you can enter archival descriptions that have been prepared in any content standard, ISAG or RAD or DACS. Dana, did you have anything?
No, I would just echo the same that, yeah, because of our where we're located, we do use RAD. There's been some talks, in recent years about updating RAD. There've been some attempts to update the RAD standards. I'm not really sure where that sits right now. It's a big job. I'm not involved. I don't envy them the task, but for the moment, for the foreseeable future, I think we're going to be using RAD for quite some time.
Yeah, and of course there's records and context, which is coming out too, right? But
Yeah.
I think at least a lot of smaller archives are going to be continuing to use RAD in Canada and not going over to records and context either, uh, at least not soon. And the other thing
No.
about that is we don't actually have the software for records and context, like Atom isn't developed for records and context. So anyway.
I know Mr. Breton had his hand raised, but he dropped the question in. Are access points unique to the Canadian standard? Because I don't think they are in ISADG.
Okay,
That's a good question. I'm
yeah.
not sure. We were only looking at RAD and DACS. That was really our focus of today, was between those two standards. I think you might be right, but I can't say for sure. Mary Grace?
Yeah, I can't say either. Sorry, Matthew. I would suggest you just maybe go to the links there that we put into chat and download a copy of RAD and download the copy of DACS, and you can check those yourself and see, how it addresses access points, and how that compares to ISAT-G.
Sorry, we don't have more on that.
Ava Jansen asks, would you spend significant effort to repair the inconsistencies and errors? She says, we don't have the resources to be gatekeeping, unfortunately, so we've decided to give students and volunteers other tasks instead of description.
Yeah, so I mean, when I was actually before I was retired, we had a lot of practicum students and we trained them on how to do preservation, arrangement, and description. And they did get an opportunity to enter archival descriptions into ADAM. So we found it was actually possible to train students to produce really accurate archival descriptions. I think you just have to have like it really helps to have a kind of like maybe a written processing manual for them to use, um, and actually spend the time, like break it up, like teach them about preservation, then move on to arrangement, then move on to description, and break it into like explaining things to them, and then giving them hands-on practice. But you have to be prepared to check their work and give them feedback. That's really critical. I don't know if that answers the question. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it didn't have to spend a lot of time on corrections because they followed that kind of step-by-step process and gave them feedback at every point.
And if it was
Shannon?
well, I was just gonna say, it depends, I guess, on the level of error. If it's errors in a little bit of punctuation, I don't think that's a big deal. I shouldn't, others would feel strongly about that. To me, that would be not the hill to die on. If it's errors in, if the material's not accurately described, like if your scope and contents, miss huge swaths of material, then that's something you probably do want to fix because your researchers are missing out. So I guess it's kind of a judgment call. There are little things that, every now and then I'll catch in the system that I'm like, oh, I should go back and fix that. If it's really little, sometimes it's easy to do and fast. If it's really little, you're like, oh, that's not that important. And you move on to the next thing. So I hear what you're saying. Limited resources, everybody's strapped for resources and time, aren't they? So, but yeah, as Mary Grace is saying, you certainly can, I started doing arrangement description as a student and I loved it. So I couldn't get enough of it. But not everybody feels that way. It's not for everybody. So yeah, no, it's tough.
Phil Gold asks, I've not used Atom for almost a decade. Can watermarked images be included in the descriptions?
Uh, so you mean, can you upload a watermarked image to Atom as a digital item? Is that the question? Because
It
you
looks
can,
like it might be.
okay, you can upload digital items and attach them to your archival descriptions
Yeah.
in Atom, and watermarked or not watermarked, whatever. I guess you want to make sure that you own copyright on them, before you upload them, and that they're, uh, and besides that you own copyright on them, that they are, because it's going to be out there on the web, that they're in the public domain. You don't want to upload copyrighted material maybe that isn't, but yeah, I don't know. Jana, your thoughts on that?
Uh, we as an institution, we don't tend to upload things that aren't in public domain unless we have permission. So, but to answer your question, you can upload material with a watermark. There are institutions that do that regularly. There's the Mennonite Photo Archive has done that's how they display their photos. It works really well. But yeah, so that is possible for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that one, Jana. It's the abbreviation I think is MAID, Mennonite Archival Information Database, and it's a really brilliant example of the use of Atom. So
Yeah.
just Google it online and have a look at it. It's really great.
John Stevens asks, how do you deal with date description when you have undated material?
Oh, okay.
Well, so RAD has a whole section on dealing with dates that are uncertain. So there's certain the general thinking in terms of in the RAD context is that it's better to have an approximate date than no date at all. Even if when you get down to your item level or file level list, you may still have things that you designate as no date or unknown or whatever terminology you choose to use. But the recommendation, you're encouraged to put some sort of date, even if it's an approximate date on the material. So whether you use a circa date, so circa 1900, there are, if there's, and you'd want to check the manual to be absolutely certain, but there's rules for using square brackets if you are pretty sure that's the date, but you as the archivist are putting that date in. You can put square brackets with a circa date. You can have, if you're certain of the decade, but you're not sure of the exact year, it could be square brackets 187 dash, meaning it's sometime in the 1870s. If you're not sure if it's in the 1870s, but you think it is, it's square bracket 187 question mark. So there's all kinds of, it gets very nuanced. So I would encourage you to look at the dates section. And I would also encourage you, if you're new to RAD, the basic RAD that we have there, the link in the chat, it's an introduction to RAD, and it simplifies it right down to just the basics. And it was done a number of years ago, but it's still very relevant. And it just talks about the essential elements, and it breaks down those dates. It doesn't cover every date possibility. RAD covers every date possibility, like the full manual, but the basic RAD gives you the most common date scenarios that you're likely to encounter. So that's what I get our students started on when students and interns start with us or volunteer. Well, we don't actually have volunteers doing description, but if I'm talking about RAD to a group, that's where I get them started. And it's really handy. So, and it's not that long, it's 40, 50 pages as opposed to hundreds and hundreds of pages. So that's what I would suggest is you check out basic RAD. And rules for archival description, look at the actual manual in the dates section. Because yes, the general thinking is that you try to have an approximate date or an estimated date. That's better than no date, because at least it narrows it down a little bit for the researcher to have an idea of this is in the realm of possible useful to me, or this is nowhere near what I hoped it would be. So I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, no, I just can't believe you have all the approximate and possible date formats memorized.
There's way more, but
I know, I know.
it goes on for
They're all
pages.
in RAD. They're all in
Yeah,
RAD, right?
yeah.
Yeah. And then
Karina McDowell asks, do you currently or do you have plans to use NICLA, Nikla, or other Indigenous authorities for place names?
I can just speak for me, from the archives I used to work in. We didn't have any Indigenous record groups or records created by Indigenous creators, but I think that would be a really useful tool, a resource to have in your toolkit if you do have Indigenous collections.
And for myself, our organization is not using that authority, but I hope that we will move in that direction, whether it's with that authority or another authority that makes better use of Indigenous place names. That's an area that we would like to see more work, better work for our organization. And as you know, this group knows, subject headings and authorities are among the last things to catch up when it comes to changes in usage, changes in names, changes in terms. This is where we're slow as a group, us and the library community. It takes us a while to make those changes in terms of those access points. So we still have work to do for sure.
Yeah, I
But that
agree.
wasn't one I was familiar with, so thank you.
Yeah.
And then last, it was just a follow-up by Douglas Roberts. He says the key point in reference to student workers, the key point is time. How much time do you have with the student or intern? If short, keep them out of the public stuff. If long enough and you have the training time, develop their ability and let them describe. Still have to check closely.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. In the practicum program I used to run, it was 3 hours a week, spread over an entire university term, so for a total of 40 hours. So we did find it was enough time to train students to do accurate archival description work.
Yeah,
Jana?
no, I think that makes sense for sure.
And I can speak to this as well. We actually are bringing in 4 student assistants this upcoming semester, which starts in a couple of weeks. We, as a university, are on the semester system, and I can have anywhere between 4 and 6 student assistants. The 4 incoming student assistants are all sophomores. They're starting their sophomore year in college. They can work up to about 12 to 15 hours a week. So we provide hands-on training on specifics of archival arrangement, description, organization, and then we also do digitization. But we start them off the first couple weeks of the semester just doing training, and then we pick individual projects based on their interests in the archival collections. And then now with this cohort, we'll have them for at least 3 years. So
Wow.
we're very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's going to be
That
great.
sounds like a great program.
Yeah.
That's all the current questions that we have in the Q&A. We have about 9 minutes left. So if anybody has any other Q&A questions, please feel free to drop them in now.
Yeah, we're happy to answer any question. And don't be afraid of RAD. I just want to say that. I mean, it is really mammoth and has lots of sections, but it's really, really easy to use and find stuff in. So, and since you can download it as a PDF online, like from the Canadian Council of Archives online, you can download it as a PDF. Then you can search it too quite easily. You know, you just use your just search the PDF for whatever you're looking for. So. Yeah, it's really not scary or hard to use.
And once you're familiar with one of these content standards, you can see the similarities. You know, you see those crosswalks that Mary Grace pointed out. But we only talked, you know, compared to content standards today. But if you look at others, you would see, you know, you as professionals, you guys can make those crosswalks yourselves and you see how they relate. So yeah, it's not as intimidating as it initially seems.
Yeah, I agree. Is that it, Vinny? Or you don't have any?
There's one more participant says, I do not see the links in the chat.
Oh,
So do you want to resend them one more time?
okay. I will put them in again.
Thank you.
Just give me a
And then
moment.
there's another request to please display the URL or search string for the YouTube channel mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that
I can get
okay.
that one.
That was in the chat too, actually. So I already did put it in, Janice, so
Oh, okay.
I'll just copy it again
Perfect.
because they were, or if you just scroll up in the chat, you will see it all too. Oh, gee. Sorry, I'm just having trouble copying here. Just a moment. Okay. I got it there. Okay. And copy and put it back in the chat again.
Now the YouTube channel. We're not professionals. So this is a group of volunteers. Just, you know, keep your expectations, you know, managed. But there's really great information there. And there's, you know, how to do a basic RAD description, how to enter a basic authority record. So lots of good information, and hopefully you will find it useful. We certainly, as a group, found it useful to pull them together. So
Yeah,
we hope
can
you will enjoy them too.
see the links in the chat now. I'm just wondering if they're showing up.
I can see them.
I see them.
Okay.
It starts with Adam Sandbox and then YouTube Adam training videos.
There we go.
And someone says they got it.
Okay, good.
I
Good.
think, yeah.
Okay. So
Great.
yeah, you just grab those links. You just copy them out of the chat and put them in on your notepad or something, and then you'll have them for future. And I think the YouTube Atom training videos are really good.
Well, I just, just want people to, we're not pros. But no, no, I think they turned out really well too. But I like to manage people's expectations.
Jana made the very first one out of all of them.
Well, no, I think as a group we found it was really helpful. And like I said, I'm really glad that we have them there to share with folks in sessions like this, but also to share with my own the staff at our own institution who are new to it or haven't used it in a while and are feeling a little intimidated getting back into it again. It's nice to have a place to point them where they can get some information. And they're short too. They're not talking about hours of training. They're nice and short and manageable.
Yeah, like 3 to 5 minutes in length.
Yeah.
I just should maybe mention too that this video will be available on the SAA-ARCS resources YouTube channel. I didn't put the link in the chat, but I don't know if Vinny, if you have that link handy, if you could drop it in the chat. The SAA-ARCS resources YouTube channel. We have about 40 videos up there now, 40 webinars that we've done. And there is one on archival description for the United States. And then there'll be this one on archival description for Canada. There we go. Thanks, Vinny. So if there's no more questions, I guess thank you all for attending, and thank you, Vinny, for hosting, and it was fun working with you, Jana.
Yes, you too. Thanks so much.
Okay.